Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Jake Tapper with us today. We'll chat with Jake in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Jake Tapper wrote the best-selling nonfiction book, The Outpost, an untold story of American valor, which was turned into a critically acclaimed film in 2020. And he also wrote 2 New York Times best-selling novels, The Hellfire Club and The Devil May Dance. He is an Emmy Award-winning TV journalist, as lead DC anchor and chief Washington correspondent for CNN, and his new book, which he co-wrote with journalist Alex Thompson, is Original Sin: President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again. Jake, welcome back into the back room.
It's great to be here, Andy. Thanks so much.
So let's talk about your book, Original Sin: President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again. Why so vague with that subtitle?
Well, we thought, Original Sin was always the title. The subtitle came after we did the reporting on the book. We talked about it. We talked about what exactly are we saying and what exactly does our reporting back up? And ultimately we concluded that the actions taken by the Biden family and the senior staff fit the definition of a cover-up, a colloquial definition of a cover-up. We're not alleging criminality, but they certainly, if a cover-up is hiding bad things, that's what they were doing. He was declining and having really, really bad moments, and they were hiding that from not just the public and the press, but from their own cabinet and their own White House team as much as possible.
So I want to get into all that with you in a bit. First, I just want to say congrats to you and Alex.
Thanks.
It is a terrific book. It's an important book, and I do think it's a book that needs to be written. I would imagine when you sit down to write a book, you hope it ultimately is a financial success, it's critically acclaimed, and I guess in a perfect world, it becomes the most talked about book in the country. So you have achieved a publishing hat trick. So congrats again on that.
Thanks. I would say just the most important thing for us was the reporting. And so I think the critical acclaim part of that is probably the most important, just because that is our peers of journalists saying they've made their case. And so that was, it's all gratifying, but that was the most important part.
There's also been controversy. And so let's address that elephant in the room for a second. You've taken heat from both the right and the left. The right accuses you of being part of that cover-up that you write about. The left doesn't like it when journalists tuck stories into their pocket and then come out months or years later for profit.
That's not quite what happened.
I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that that's what some people think, and that's what angers some people. Doesn't mean it actually happened.
But almost all the reporting for the book was after the election. It was an after the election pitch to publishers. It was an after the election conversation with my agent and with Alex and his agent about the proposal. And almost every single interview for the book took place after the election. We did more than 200 interviews. And I would have loved to have broken the story in real time that, Joe Biden didn't recognize George Clooney at that June 2024 fundraiser, but I wasn't able to. A lot of these people subscribed to what the Biden people believed, which was anything that was critical of Biden would help Trump. And so once the election was over, the threat was realized, so it didn't really matter anymore, and people were much more willing to talk.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. If you interview people after an election, they're going to be more willing to reveal and divulge things that they, of course, wouldn't divulge during the administration, especially while there's an important election taking place.
Every election book is written after the election. This isn't uncommon. It's one of the best election books ever written. What It Takes, which was a profile of 6 men running for president, including Joe Biden, written by a guy named Richard Ben Kramer. That was about the 1988 election, and it was a book that came out in 1991 or 1992.
Yeah. Well, the reason I say it's an important book and it's a book that needs to be written is because it's part of history. And our history has to be documented for future generations. And my feeling is, and I went to journalism school, and so I maybe appreciate this in a sense that others might not. But writing about Biden and covering Trump now are not mutually exclusive.
I cover Trump every day. I mean, I'm in Chicago right now on this book tour, and I will be going to the Chicago Bureau of CNN and doing a 2-hour show, and we will be talking about Trump's last night, his ban on countries, on people from these countries coming to the country, coming into the United States. We'll be talking about the deal that the Department of Justice entered into with the Texas Governor Greg Abbott about kicking undocumented students out of colleges in Texas. I mean, we're going to be covering it all. It's very, very important that we cover what's going on right now. And I completely agree, and I do it.
And so the biggest question to me is, how you've covered Biden in the past, and you've expressed that, if I had known certain things, or maybe I could have done some things differently. How has that period informed your coverage of Trump today? Because the truth is a lot of people, and I personally agree with them, who think that whatever Biden was, we're dealing with a guy now who is 1 million times worse. I mean, he is corrupt. He is a pathological liar. There's cruelty. There's unconstitutional executive orders, and he's trying to dismantle democracy. Those are really important things. How are you covering that in a way that folks would have loved the media, not just you, to accurately and more appropriately cover Biden and his mental and physical diminishment?
Well, our coverage of the book is not particularly about Biden as in terms of his policies. And history will render its verdict on that. We talk about some of his policies, but the book is really focused on his decision to run for re-election and his decision and that of those around him to hide as much as possible his deterioration, which was not particularly successful. I mean, people saw it happening in real time, although they didn't know the extent of it. And then, of course, came the night of the debate in June 2024. And when, it became very clear to top Democrats and Democratic voters now that he couldn't win, and for some people even that he probably wasn't capable of being president 24/7, which was our conclusion after doing the reporting. I view the Trump presidency as separate and distinct from that because he's a different person and he's a different, we're not, my coverage of Trump tends to be about the policies that he is enacting and the norms he is shattering and the envelopes he is pushing. I was doing that during his first run in 2015, 2016. I did it during his first presidency from 2017 to 2021. I certainly would find it hard if people thought I was not aggressive covering Trump then, and we're covering Trump aggressively now. I think one of the differences, and this is not necessarily your question, but I think one of the differences between Trump's second administration and his first administration is that he's much better planned this time. There are policies that he's enacting with a much more organized administration and staff and team. So our coverage of his policies it's more about his policies than about his tweets, because he's much more effective at enacting his policies today than he was in his first term when, very few people thought he was going to win and he was not prepared. And it was a little bit more slapdash. And he also had an administration that had people in it that were guardrails on him. And he really doesn't have that at all today. The only way that my coverage of Biden has, or writing this book about Biden has affected my coverage of Trump is that I just think that first of all, our tolerance for opaqueness when it comes to the health records of presidents in general, I have much less of that. I just think that we as a people, and this isn't specific to Biden or Trump, but we as a public need to be able to demand all of complete transparency when it comes to the health records of our presidents. As that affects Donald Trump, it affects Donald Trump. But It's really just about a standard that I think we all need and should have for every president. And then I think just like this doesn't change my coverage of Trump, but I mean, just the knowledge that White Houses lie is something that is very foremost in my mind when I think about the Biden White House, but it also already was foremost in my mind about the Trump White House, both 1.0 and now 2.0.
The book was released just days after the revelation that Biden has aggressive prostate cancer. Your book has ignited a conversation that seems so much more relevant now, considering that had Biden won, we'd be sitting here just months later with the nation facing a major leadership crisis.
Yeah. Zeke Emanuel, who I think worked for Biden, very respected oncologist, part of the legendary Emanuel brothers, Ari, Ram, Zeke. Zeke Emanuel went on Morning Joe and then went on my show later that day after the diagnosis, saying that this kind of aggressive cancer, prostate cancer that is now in President Biden's bones, and obviously I know you and I, and I'm sure everybody listening wishes him absolutely the best of luck with this, treating it, beating it if possible. Zeke Emanuel said that that he likely had this for years while in the White House, which is not to say he knew that he had it, but just that he had it. And I think there are questions about, and this isn't part of our book, and this is not part. I'm not alleging cover up, but if his last PSA test, and Andy, you and I know that when we get checkups, we get PSA tests, which is just a little blood test, and they're just checking to make sure that you don't have prostate cancer. And Biden's last PSA test was in 2014. Now there is a school of thought that after age 70, there are so many false positives that it doesn't make sense to do it. But I think there are questions about why didn't he have PSA tests? Trump just had one the other day in April, I think, because yes, false positives for the average Joe, but if there are, no pun intended, but if you're running to be president, you should, probably should be on top of that. So I don't know. There are questions about PSA tests but it does highlight the point of how sensitive it is to cover anything having to do with somebody's health, somebody that's not you, and you're being pushy and inquisitive and intrusive by asking questions about it. The most sensitive questions about somebody's body, somebody's health, somebody's mortality. B, how transparent has the Biden team been about any of his health, which is, I think, a question only they can answer. But he obviously was not transparent when it came to his cognitive health.
I'd love to, if you give a little insight on the cover-up aspect of what you wrote about. Can you talk about that a little?
Sure. I mean, our reporting suggests that he showed instances of deterioration as far back as 2015. And then when Robert Hur and his report came out in February of 2024, that was the investigation into Biden's mishandling of classified information, which Hur concluded that he wasn't going to prosecute because he thought a jury would consider Biden to come across as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. That was his quote. But the Hur report not only concluded that after prosecutors talked to Biden at length in October 2023, but when they listened to audio tapes of Biden talking to his ghostwriter in 2017 and 2018. So as far back as then, Joe Biden was having trouble with dates, and he was losing train of thought in the middle of conversations and that sort of thing. Our reporting suggests that a lot of all staffers want the primary person, the principal, to look as good as possible. So what started out as helpful aids for the president in terms of teleprompters, in terms of note cards, in terms of having events take place between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., those became crutches that, all of a sudden he would be at a fundraiser in front of 40 people behind the scenes, closed press, and he'd be using a teleprompter for 10-minute remarks, that sort of thing. And by the end of 2023, our reporting suggests that there was a concerted effort to hide Joe Biden from his own cabinet, and that came from interviews with his cabinet. Mm-hmm. So that's what we mean by cover up. I mean, the reason why we were all so shocked the night of the debate isn't because he seemed old. He'd seemed old for years. It was because he seemed addled. It was because he seemed like he was not able to do the job of president that night on that debate stage. And that was what they had been hiding, that Joe Biden, a non-functioning Joe Biden, which was not how he was 24/7. We're not saying that he was, but we're saying that Biden reared his head before the night of the debate. And that's a real problem because that's the job requires somebody who's able to do the job 24/7. And by the end of his presidency, there were cabinet secretaries who told us they didn't think the president could be relied upon for that proverbial 2 a.m. phone call in the middle of the night with a national security emergency. And that's terrifying. And I'm glad we didn't have one, as far as I know, but that's a very concerning thing.
Now, you've recently suggested that this cover-up might be worse than Watergate. How so?
Well, I don't particularly find it helpful to compare scandals. I was asked about that on Piers Morgan because we had there's a section in the book in which we quote the Watergate prosecutor Archibald Cox talking years later about the dangers of a powerful presidential staff. And we quoted that and said, this scandal is not Watergate. This is an entirely separate scandal. And Piers Morgan thought I was suggesting that this is nothing compared to Watergate. We were not actually comparing them one way or the other. We're saying they're just different. I did say that it might be worse than Watergate because, I don't know how you compare these things. Lots of people went to prison for Watergate, and I don't think anybody is going to go to prison for this. And I'm not suggesting that they should. But I think that Watergate is a discrete break-in and cover-up of a crime and money laundering and such that I'm not belittling it. It's horrifying, awful. Nixon got everything coming to him and his folks. But in terms of the actual effect it had on the American people, you could argue in this exercise of which scandal is worse, which again, I don't find particularly illuminating, but I got baited into it on Piers, so it's my fault. You could argue that this scandal has more of an impact on the American people because I do think that there were a lot of things that happened during the Biden presidency that our reporting suggests had an impact on the American people. We have a scene in the book where Senator Mike Bennett, Democrat from Colorado, goes to the White House in June 2024 for an immigration event, and Biden is not, he's non-functioning Biden in a way. Bad moments in front of the camera, bad moments behind the scenes. And Michael Bennett leaves that event thinking this is why our immigration policy is such a mess, because this guy can't manage the portfolio. There's a bunch of competing interests in the White House, people who want to do different things, and Biden's not capable of running his team. Mm-hmm. And that's why the immigration policy is a mess. And so if you think that the immigration policy failures are significant, which I do, and I think like even if you're looking at it from a completely progressive and humanist way, the drain on resources in cities, the lack of planning, the opening of the door to Donald Trump to come, the fact that it became such a crisis that it became one of the ways that Donald Trump got reelected. Even if you're just looking at it through that point of view, it's a crisis and a calamity. And if you're looking at it from a different point of view, the people that came into this country that were bad actors and such, then you can argue that it really did have an impact on the American people and their lives. And there's any number of other questions that Democrats that we interviewed for the book have about the Biden administration and policies and leadership or lack thereof that I think make it an open question.
Yeah, and you write about that Biden's inner circle believed that no matter how ailing or incapacitated he might have been, it was their contention that Trump would be so much worse, and that was, I guess, in part some of their motivation or justification for not disclosing certain things.
Look, I understand the argument, and I'm sure that there are people that are listening to my voice right now who would say I would take Joe Biden in a coma over Donald Trump as president, because of the policies and because they would have faith in his team or Vice President Harris or his aides or whatever. And, I understand that argument. Certainly from a policy point of view, I get that there are people who hate what Donald Trump is doing to this country. I cover it every day. I understand. But that's not the American presidency. The American presidency is a very powerful job. We elect one person to that job, and that one person we expect to be able to do the job. And the Biden team's argument was, A, only Joe Biden has ever beaten Donald Trump. B, therefore, only Joe Biden can beat Donald Trump in 2024. And C, Donald Trump is an existential threat to the American people. So,
and D, Joe Biden himself believed that I alone, which sounds very similar to some other president we know,
right.
He believed that too.
Yeah, this is the Biden theology. Yeah, this is what they thought. And so, that's, if you convince yourself that that is all that matters and that those are truths, then you can justify almost anything. I mean, there was somebody that we talked to for the book who said all Joe Biden needed to do was get to election day, and then every now and then show proof of life, and the aides would run the country. And again, I understand why people prefer Donald Trump. I mean, why they prefer Joe Biden's policies to Donald Trump's policies. But A, that is not what the presidency is. Mm-hmm. We're not electing a committee. We're electing a man or a woman. And B, these elections are decided by, 250,000 to 500,000 voters in 7 states. And that's not how they look at it. They don't say, well, I would take Joe Biden in a coma over Donald Trump. They don't think that. They are not partisan Democrats. And they, at the end of the day, Joe Biden was having a really tough time winning them back to his coalition. And so, I mean, it's an exercise in blue state thinking, and I'm sitting here in Chicago, so I understand, and I'm from Philadelphia and I live in Washington, D.C. I know what blue state thinking is, or blue city thinking is, but where independents and swing voters don't really matter, but that's not our country. And, it's kind of an argument that is made for an audience of just one party. And look, there are people that would take Donald Trump in a coma over whatever, Gavin Newsom.
Some might say he's actually in a coma.
He's definitely not. He's definitely very active. Right. But in any case, that's just, our elections are close, and independent voters matter, and disaffected Democrats matter. And
well, I think you're raising a really good point, and I think this is what's missed by a lot of people, because in our toxic partisan landscape today, we have 2 teams, and there's a lot of people who believe that whatever your team does is the right choice and it's justified. And my opinion is, whether you skirt the law or cover something up, or don't divulge information, or you test boundaries and norms, it's in a way equal if you're doing it nefariously or if you're doing it because you think you are in the right. And that's why this becomes a very difficult conversation for people, because it's so black and white for a lot of people. There's no gray for them.
Yeah, and it's not just that. It's that's a keen insight. But beyond that, the norms that are shattered by one party, eventually the other party is going to take control of the White House or the House or the Senate. Mm-hmm. They don't restore those norms. They then take advantage of those norms being destroyed for their purposes. And we've seen this when Harry Reid started chipping away at the filibuster. He did it for this, and then Mitch McConnell did it for that. And those norms don't return. The other thing that's interesting is horseshoe theory, which is, as I'm sure your listeners know, but just in case there's one or two who don't, it's the idea that politics is not on a horizontal spectrum. You don't have the left over here and the right over here, and politics is just like the far left and the far right are couldn't be farther apart. It's that politics is actually in a horseshoe, and the far left and the far right actually meet at the ends of the horseshoe. And that is why you find so many people who hop back and forth, journalists and activists and such, Tulsi Gabbard, or, who quit the DNC because she supported Bernie Sanders. She quit the DNC because they were so unfair, and now she's a member of the Trump administration. I mean, how does that even happen? Mm-hmm. Well, the horseshoe theory makes sense of that. And I see, and this is just a small example, but I see people criticizing the book on the right who say something, and then people on the left take their argument and run with it for their purposes because they both want to disqualify the book or me or whatever. And it's just interesting because it's like, this is one of the ways our politics is broken, not having to do with me. I'm just saying, like, because sure. it's about tribalism and winning for their individual point of view, not about winning elections or convincing a majority of the people that your side is right or whatever. So, I mean, I as a nonpartisan, as a journalist, I see it and I don't particularly understand. I mean, I have a lot of very good friends who are, some of them mutual, who are dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, and I have friends who are dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, and I love them and respect them, family members too, but like, that's just not where I come from.
Yeah, well, it's a slippery slope when people start to justify their unethical or, in some cases, illegal actions just because they think they're in the right. It's like, where does that then go? Like you referred to the next administration. Like, once you go to those places, it's hard to dial that shit back.
So our argument, the book's argument is the central thesis is not Donald Trump should be president. Or the central thesis is Joe Biden should not have run for re-election because he was not capable of doing it. And what he should have done is that, and this is based on interviews with, like I said, more than 200 people who worked for Biden or worked to get his legislation and achievements passed. This is what he should have done, according to all these top Democrats who are quoted in the book or referred to in the book, is announced he was not running for re-election and allowed there to be Democratic primaries. And then there would have been a very competitive Democratic primary process. Kamala Harris would have run. Buttigieg, Newsom, Pritzker, Whitmer, Shapiro, Warnock, Klobuchar, on and on and on. And in all likelihood, a very strong Democratic nominee would have emerged, and that person might have beaten Donald Trump. Would have certainly had a better chance than Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, only given 107 days. Mm-hmm. And that would have been selfless, and that would have been in the best interests of the Democratic Party, and one could argue the nation. And that's the basic thesis of the book. Once you start having these moments where you're not able to be president 24/7, and Andy, God willing, you and I will make our way to our 80s and start experiencing. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm 56, and I feel every day of that.
You're a kid. I'm 65.
But I mean, I'm just saying, like, you start, you know what aging is like, mm-hmm. And then if you're lucky enough to make it to 81, 82. Maybe you're sharp enough 24/7 to do the job, but maybe you're not. And there is a certain humility that's necessary to, like, I get it. It's tough. It's tough to decide, it's time for me to retire. But I think it's hard to argue that wouldn't have been better for the country. And, the Biden and his team still think to this day, A, he could have won, which is, I don't know, one pollster of his that thinks that. And B, that he could do the job until January 2029, which to me is just insanity. Mm. I just don't even know how anybody can make that argument with a straight face.
Well, one of the most interesting things to me in your book was the revelation that the Biden inner circle was not especially helpful to the Harris campaign once she became the nominee. Can you talk about that a little?
Well, I mean, the relationship between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. I mean, I think that there was genuine closeness there, but this was a marriage of convenience, not love. They picked her because they thought it was the smartest political choice, not because his heart was with Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, and they picked her for any number of reasons, including the George Floyd riots and the recognition that Black women are the beating heart of the Democratic Party. Certainly Harris was vetted and an attractive candidate with a strong resume and all that. I don't want to take anything away from her, but theirs was not a close relationship to begin with. And even as Joe and Kamala became tighter as colleagues and as a team, she was never like his top advisor or a top aide or in the inner circle. And there was a lot of resentment between the two camps. The Harris people didn't think the Biden people helped them enough. And the Biden people thought the Harris people were incompetent and not up to the job. And they didn't have a lot of respect for her. And she was used as an excuse by the Biden people as to why he had to run. If he doesn't run, who's going to run? Her? She's even less popular than him, they would say. She gets the nomination, flash forward, she gets the nomination through acclamation, basically. And there wasn't a lot of help. There wasn't a lot of assistance. The Biden team kind of, Mike Donilon, Biden's top aide, went back to the White House instead of helping her. Not that he had any particular wisdom at that point that I think could have helped her, but still, it's telling that he goes back to the White House and from Wilmington. And they're other than him endorsing her early on, like 20 minutes after he dropped out, which was very helpful for her to get the nomination, there wasn't a lot of help. And in fact, Joe Biden would rear his head every now and then, and I don't think purposely, but hurt her. There was an incident at a firehouse on the 9/11 anniversary where Joe Biden was goofing around with a fireman there and put on his MAGA baseball hat. Which became, obviously an instant viral video suggesting that he supported Trump and not her. And she was there. That was the last event they did together before the election, purposely because of that. She said, "What is he doing that is so unhelpful?" And then every now and then he would say something that was just, about we got to lock him up. And then, of course, came like a week before the election, she was about to give a speech about unifying the country. And Biden, who at that point was relegated to Zoom calls and feeling really depressed that he was not part of the campaign the way that Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were, because he'd become a liability, was on a Zoom call and he referred to, you might remember that comic Tony Hinchcliffe, who at a Trump event in Madison Square Garden, referred to Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. Anyway, he referred to Trump supporters as garbage or something like that. They tried to fix it and edit, but in the transcript. But anyway, it was just really, really unhelpful. I don't think that those comments necessarily cost her the election. I think the albatross of Joe Biden and his unpopular presidency at that point among the American people, if not among Democratic voters, was enough. But he wasn't particularly helpful.
The book is Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again. Jake, thanks for coming on and talking about it.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Andy. Continued success. Love to your family.
Likewise. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.